Foobius, man, thank you so much for joining us today for another episode of In the Trenches. It is a absolute pleasure to get to chat with you. How are you doing this morning, man?
I'm good, dude. Thank you for having me. Excited to sit down and have a conversation.
Yeah, same, man, same. I've heard so much about you from my colleagues, and this is gonna be great. So, first question for you. You know, we always kind of start these off the same way. We'd love to know the history um, of your trading career and your crypto life. You know, walk us through your path
Yeah,
in crypto and in trading. How'd you get into it? And maybe specifically, what were like the biggest obstacles that you faced in your early trading career?
sure. So to make I guess a long story short, I first heard of crypto back in like 2017 or something around there. Um, Friend of mine basically was like, "Hey, you should check out this app called Coinbase. There's this new thing called Bitcoin. It's the future of money. That was the narrative back then, right? It was going to kind of replace dollars. We were going to transact on Bitcoin. Obviously, we're far away from that at this point. But I thought it sounded pretty cool. Uh, Had a few $100,000 or something that I chucked into it. I obviously bought the top. As as things go, right? You have to be like pretty plugged in, pretty technical back then to have heard about it, or buying drugs on Silk Road, right? Those are like probably the two paths. I was doing neither, so I bought the top. But I held on to it. I thought it like sounded like it had potential, and like what am I going to do with the $1,000 that I got rugged on? Uh, but never really like dove too deeply into it. I understood what Bitcoin, ETH, a couple others were, what they did. Um, but was young, was focused on school and having fun with my friends and things like that. Flash forward to the next cycle, it's 2020 or so. I'm a little bit more tapped in. I'm clued into the 4-year cycle. I kind of understand how the rotations work. So I buy some altcoins before the boom starts. Run up a couple grand to low six figures, and then ventured on chain kind of towards the mania phase of that cycle. Spun up a MetaMask wallet, bought some NFTs. Got rugged on some stuff on AVAX like Snowdog and things like that come to mind. Um, Gave away the six figures that I made, DCAing the dip during the bear market, and kind of was like, all right, well, I'm gonna take a step back, and I think that was actually one of my regrets. I wish that I stuck around through the bear market, in 2022, 2023, and traded on chain that entire time, because I think you really develop a set of skills that kind of enhances the level of competency and your ability to make money when times are good. But I basically came back in 2023 around the time that Rollbit and Pepe were coming about. My first trade back was Pepe. I took the dust that I had in that MetaMask wallet, which was probably $1,000, stuck it in there, and that turned into 40, 50 grand. Um, could have been more if I sold it better, but obviously a pretty big trade, and that's been kind of the base of the cash that I've been trading off, and the port that I've been growing ever since.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, the Pepe trade was a big turning point for me as well. Can you kind of talk me through what it was about Pepe for you that like clicked outside of kind of the obvious? Um,
Yeah. I think what really helped me there was what I didn't know, right? And so stepping away for some time and not really being a participant in on-chain led me to think that this was a novel coin, right? That there hadn't been 20 or 30 Pepes beforehand. And I was like, okay, well, like I know that this is the biggest meme basically like on the internet, or at least this corner of the internet that we like to live on. And yeah, back then, I was getting I didn't really have a network. I was just trading solo. My source of information was mainly just a few good Twitter accounts that I had identified. One of them posted about it, and he was like, this is the one. This is high conviction for me." And I honestly followed his conviction. And that mixed with, just being like fresh and not really having like any baggage that I was carrying with myself, both in, like I was saying, my knowledge of how many Pepes came before, and just like, you don't know how high these coins can go. So you like don't have a ceiling, and it makes it easy to hold. And I threw in an amount that I was obviously comfortable kind of losing. So that was the magic formula.
Can you walk us through a little bit of how you thought about getting out of that trade? Like you said you threw a grand or so
Yeah,
into it, that grand 50x'd. How do you think about scaling when you're in a trade like that?
right. I think my behavior's changed a lot over the 3 years or so that we've had in between. But back then, even being more or less a noob, I recognized that getting the Binance listing and probably like tripling or quadrupling in an hour was probably a good time to start taking money off the table, right? And so I was selling into those candles. I definitely didn't sell all of it, and I held some a little bit too long, and had to sell it a bit lower. But I think like innately I had the sense that attention was peaking, right? And that's probably one of my first lessons of how to handle those type of situations, and how everything really is tied to like how where is it in its attention cycle, who's left to buy, so forth and so on. And maybe I wasn't thinking of those things so tangibly at the time, but it was maybe just like a kind of this like instinctual gut feel. And like I think again I was like leaning on Twitter and like other better traders than me that were like, okay, like I'm exiting.
For sure. Yeah. Do you feel like that particular trade was a turning point for maybe the trader
Absolutely.
that you were before when you kind of got wrecked buying the top and then everything
Yeah,
you've done
yeah.
after?
Yeah, I think it was I can't like say that it was a trade made out of skill. It was like a lot of luck. It was a lot of being at the right place at the right time. Um, but obviously, like things that you do before that lucky moment have some level of influence. Of that. You will yourself into the luck, basically. I guess is what I'm trying to say. Um, and so, yeah, I think it had a big impact, both positive and negative. I mean, positively, it gave me a lot of wiggle room to kind of like have a port to play with, right? So I think if there are some guys that have smaller ports, I can tell you that you're in the hardest part of the journey, right? Like when you have a few $100, a few $1,000, whatever it might be. Um, it's the game is significantly harder. And then as that number grows into tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions, um it takes a lot of the kind of the pressure off, right? And I think the trading is very much rooted fundamentally in emotion and your ability to control those emotions. And when you have like more wiggle room, I think it has this subconscious effect of making everything a little bit easier. So it did that for me, right? And then secondary would be that it taught me to hold things, which has been great at times and awful at other times. And so it led to me catching a lot of big trades. It's also led to me round tripping a lot of big trades, and so it's kind of a double sided sword in that way. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think it like fundamentally was kind of like what shaped me as a trader. I've always been kind of a holder, not a scalper, right? And that's something that I've carried with me through this day.
Yeah, I'm with you on for me, my experience with that particular trade was that I don't know now if another token can have that kind of like long consolidation and end up becoming something massive the way that it did. Like
Right.
it's almost skewed my sense of what is possible
Yeah.
because it did take a while to play out. Like the first couple weeks it was massive and then it retraced 90% and then it just went sideways forever before it finally made like the actual move that everybody kind of knows about, right?
Right. Right. Yeah,
Um
man. I mean, it's just like it's changed so much since then. You know what I mean? It's just like it's really apples to oranges to compare the on-chain environment and in early 2023 to kind of like what we have today. So you have to adjust to the to the conditions that are put in front of you, basically.
Yeah, I'd kind of like to maybe go down that path with you a little bit and talk to me
Sure.
about how that adjustment process has been for you and kind of like what, I don't know, what skills have you had to develop since that big Pepe trade um, to
Yeah.
to capture good trades on coins that don't have the same life cycle.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think, experience is the teacher of all things, right? And like, especially when you make mistakes and they have a monetary consequence, those lessons tend to stick with you the hardest. And I think what really like separates people who have success and those who find themselves kind of spinning, on the hamster wheel, is the ability to or like I guess the propensity to like actually take those lessons and make meaningful changes on the back of them, right? So you see some traders who do the same thing over and over and over again and they can't get out of their own way. And then you see other guys who, are kind of like taking the data that they're getting from the market and from their own execution, studying that or thinking about it, and then basically like being like, okay, here's how I need to adjust, right? And so, over the years, right, like following Pepe, I hit Unibot, and then I hit Harry Potter, Obama Sonic Inu, and I held all of those for to the top, and I think I overheld them both because my baseline was how Pepe played out, right? And so I was constantly watching my balance go plus 100 200,000 and then back down to round trip another 100K, and you're kind of just like stuck in that ebb and flow. And I eventually like I made many mistakes. I was new. My my a lot of the Pepe profits were given back round tripped. um and then I think I was always able to, like I guess like the tenet, the core tenet of crypto, or like the thing that I learned very early on is that you always have to be willing to kind of like be flexible, be adaptable, and be interested in like what's the next best thing. And so the way that I kind of like fought back was through friend tech. Friend tech came around. I jumped on it like the first day, bought keys to people's channels or groups or whatever. And that had kind of like a dual sided effect where I, one, was able to start building and growing my network within crypto because it got me into chats that I otherwise would have never been in. And two, I caught an early trade and it helped me rebuild my port. So along the way, it's been just like kind of this like constant adjustment, right? And like I'd be lying if I was always adjusting fast enough or adjusting correctly. Like I've managed to build my port up well, but I've made a lot of mistakes too. I got smoked, in on 1010 and in Q4 last year, gave a ton of profits back. And so then, the adjustment that I've made since is I'm not trading perps, for the time being, right? Like I'm just focusing on chain because that's my core competency. So like it's just it's a long game, and I think that your job as a trader is to be like very inward looking and um constantly like reflecting. Journaling is obviously a really, really big tool, whether that's writing down every trade that you're taking or just taking time to, sit down every day, every week, or when just like big moments happen, and write down, how you felt, what happened, what you could have done better, etc. Like those are the ways that you grow, right? You don't want to be the guy who's just like trying the same thing over and over again, because that's how you stay a loser.
Yeah, for sure. That inward self reflection is a really, really important piece. And I don't know how you go through it without kind of time in the game. I think you just have to be
Yeah,
doing it, get to the point where you're so frustrated and fed up that you have to that you can only look internally for some sort of answer to a solution. Um, I'm glad that
fully
you
agree,
brought.
man. All
I'm
the
really.
biggest moments have been from just like from reaching very low lows. You know what I mean? Like those are when the biggest changes and level ups have happened for me. So I think it's pretty common.
Yeah, I completely agree as well. I kind of want to dig in there. Like, what would you say after that, like, deep internal search is your key competency, your most important edge, and how have you developed it over the years?
Oh man, it's a tough question. I mean, some guys are like great at tracking wallets, other guys are like just absolute hawks when it comes to finding like, brand new coins at in meme scope or whatever, right? I think my edge is probably like some combo of the network that I've managed to build, and my ability to, kind of like bridge overarching narratives that come from outside of crypto into trading. And so, I've been like I'd call myself a narrative trader, and a swing trader, and so, all of my biggest trades have kind of been like built on the back of just like I don't know if having good taste is the right term, but it's like kind of what it is, right? Like you have to be like plugged into the internet. You have to understand what the audience that we tend to like call our cohorts likes, right? So like the type of humor, the type of things that people find interesting, in the tech and crypto world, like those are the biggest tools, right? And so um, for me, it's just been like being online for a long period of time and being in crypto for a decent amount of time, and kind of like understanding how people here think and what they tend to gravitate towards. And they're pretty simple things, right? Like, is it funny? That probably mattered more than it does today in the past, but like I think it's still important, right? Like, does it resonate with people? Is it viral outside of our circle? Who's in the trade, who's out of the trade? Is it novel? I think that's probably like the biggest thing for me is most of my best trades have come on the back of it being something that we haven't seen before. But the list goes on. So yeah, I think a long-winded answer, but hopefully an answer nonetheless.
Can you walk us through? I mean, I've understood that you're kind of this bigger narrative trader. Can you walk us through how you go about deciding what trade you're going to take versus what trade you're not going to take? Like, how do you make the distinction? Um,
Yeah.
maybe in the
Yeah.
moment, like, what does it take for you? What are the green flags and what are like the clear red flags? I'm not going to do that.
Sure. Yeah, man. I think you know, the biggest reward, the biggest payoff in on-chain comes from kind of having a willingness to be like the first guy that steps off the boat, right? So like the best trades I found are the ones that end up doing the most for my P&L are, when we're stuck in one meta or we're stuck without a meta and kind of just floating aimlessly, and you're sitting at your desk and you finally like something comes up that makes you be like, wow, I haven't seen that before, right? And so like let's say in Q4, goat for example, right? Like there had not been an AI like Twitter account that I knew of at least, right? And I thought that was cool. I thought it was unique. And then obviously like it caught the attention of Andreessen and all those like guys in Silicon Valley, and it blew up to be what it was. But at the beginning, it was just simply this is something that no one's made a coin on, right? And I think like Unibot was another, that was the first terminal. That was like, there's just like, there are these obvious moments where you are finally like in a sea of copycats and a sea of kind of the same thing over and over again. You finally see something that is novel, and I think that's like usually when I try to really push the gas.
Got it. So this is a sentiment that just like time and time again, every single trader that I talk to says the exact same thing. What you just said, like novelness, if that's a word, is the key component every single time.
More or less, yeah, I would agree. I
And
think it's
so
like the foundation at least, and then there's obviously like all these like things on the side, right? Like like Confluence and KOLs and like that entire part of the game. I think it's for like it or not, it's a big piece of the puzzle, right? So like who's in, who's early, who has an incentive to see this coin do well, who still potentially could buy it, right? Like, you want to like kind of have like this chain reaction um of like new entrants coming in who have motion and who can shill your coin. So if like Ansem, for example, buys it in day one, then you're like, okay, well, like this just reached 1 million Twitter followers in the first hour, right? And maybe that's detrimental because you ideally want, like sharp people who hold, who, have like vision and a long-term strategy to be the ones that are getting in early, and you want kind of like the tag-alongs to get in late, right? And so like who's in, who's out, when did they get in, when did they get out? Like all those things are extremely important. And like only when all those pieces really like come together in the perfect way do you get the billion-dollar runner, right? And the other thing I guess that's really worth mentioning is that in on chain, I think what matters more than even the merits of a coin is the condition that it's spawned in, right? And so understanding like how many participants are on chain, what does the liquidity on chain look like, how are people behaving, like are they holding, are they flipping, are they believing, are they scalping, right? Like those are extremely important because if goat came out today or if the rebro came out today, it probably fizzle out at 30, 40, 50 million, max, right? Like if everything goes perfect. And just the reason for it is just that we're like in a bear market, right? And so like you have to always adjust to that, and recognize that no matter how awesome a coin is, it's really kind of like a victim to the environment that it was brought up in.
so do you think then, like, we have a handful of tokens that have hit some pretty decent market caps recently, White Whale, Penguin.
Yeah.
Are those, do you feel like they're kind of capped out at around where they're at right now because of the overall conditions of the market?
Well, I mean, I think both of those coins, if you're like watching the flows on them and understanding why they're moving the way that they are, um, like you can throw the term cabal around or whatever, right? But like they are truly like at the whim of like a small subset of very rich people that could frankly like probably push them as high or as low as they want to. And so and I think that's important. You like have to identify, is this like a coin that's running because there's like a lot of money in the system and people are excited about it and buying it, or is it running because there's a perp trader like White Whale who's bought 50% of the supply in a price agnostic way, right? And so um I don't know. I mean, I think the RR on both of them is probably fairly limited at this point, and you can only really get a good return if you put a lot of capital into them, and are looking for like maybe a 2, 3, 4x max upside. It's not my trade in these conditions, like I think they could go higher maybe. But I'm not going to be the one who's taking the risk on it. Um, but yeah, learning to like read the chain and to understand, what kind of like what's pushing your coin up is extremely important, because then it helps you understand, whether it's like this organic thing or if it's, the pump fund crew or White Whale or somebody like that. Like ensuring that this is going to be successful. Like there's a Binance connected wallet that owns almost 20% of the Penguin coin, right? You know, like those are that doesn't happen often. So if you can identify it early, you can catch a sick trade. But just don't be the guy who sticks around and holds the bag.
For sure. This might be a really difficult question to answer in the format that we're speaking right now, but for somebody who's new who wants to dig in more into this idea of reading the chain, how
Yeah.
like how would you explain to them the very intro process of like use this tool, start digging
Sure.
into what's the process there that you could explain without, having your screen up and like actually showing us?
Yeah. I'm not gonna like pretend that I'm like that's like my edge, right? Like there are definitely much better people that you could have on to give a long how-to on this and probably like reveal some really good tips and best practices. Um, I think the simplest way is just like pull open Soul Scan, right? Like go into a go into a coin on Dex Screener or Axiom or Padre or whatever you like to use. Pull open the top wallets, go into Soul Scan, and sift through their transactions, right? Like see then you could put them into like CeeLo, to see kind of like a history of how they've performed over time, right? And then you can kind of use that to understand, did this guy get lucky? Is this guy potentially an insider? Is he a sharp who's constantly catching good trades? Right. And you can start kind of building up your bank of wallets and kind of help build your own confluence and give yourself more signal on the back of that. I think the other piece of the answer is like if you're interested in this or like literally anything at this point, an LLM is your best friend, right? Like go into ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or whatever you like to use. Tell it that you want to learn how to better read the chain and how to track wallets and flows, and it will literally hold your hand and show you every single thing that the best guys are doing, more or less, right? Or at the very least, give you like an extremely, extremely strong foundation. So, um, yeah, I think just like lean on the easiest, like best tool you got, which is a large language model at this point would be my overall opinion. And then pair that with just like being curious and clicking around and getting comfortable with the explorers basically.
How does FOMO fit into this equation for you? FOMO
Yeah,
being, the fact that you're able to so easily follow and track, it's not
big
tracking
piece.
wallets, but you're tracking traders, right? How does how does that piece play in for you? Maybe more
Yeah,
specifically, how do you utilize FOMO in your day-to-day process just generally?
absolutely. Yeah, I think FOMO is like honestly one of the most like incredible things that's come out in the last year or two in crypto, potentially ever. Just for the fact that it democratizes information, right? Like I think that was the team's vision at the beginning was to like on chain, crypto. It's like this murky thing. It's hard to bring somebody new into it. How do we like take all this info that's obfuscated and hard to find and kind of like make it more accessible for a regular person? And I think they've really nailed that to a large degree. So when I talk about tracking wallets or tracking traders, throughout the course of this conversation, a large part of that now is just seeing, who's buying what on FOMO or who's selling what on FOMO. Um, I think in terms of FOMO, like there's just as much signal in who's holding and what coins are like not crowded, right? Like there's right now a limited amount of people that are playing on chain, even though it's much higher than it was in 2023 when I started. Or and you hear all these like doom and gloom stories. Like it's not doom and gloom, it's growing, and FOMO's numbers really show that. But I think you have to keep it real with yourself and remember that there are still it's a limited pool of capital that's kind of sloshing around, right? And we're all like taking money from each other and giving it back to each other on day to day, week to week basis, more or less. So on FOMO, I love to look for confluence. Love to see, that there's good guys in coins. I think another big signal is like finding coins that you think are cool that you see that like almost nobody's holding, right? Because if you can beat the next KOL to a coin and ride their shill and exit for multiples, right? Like that's a really really good way to grow your port. So I think using it in both of those ways is quite important. Um, and yeah, I mean, I just think like, for me, my like big way of getting my name out and meeting people was through friend tech. FOMO is the way that you do that today, or the best way at least. I think like it's your on-chain resume. So if you have the ability to, the guy who hit the penguin trade, I forget his name, but he went from like a couple thousand followers on Twitter to I think like 10, 15, 20,000 in the course of a few days, all because he made half a million bucks on FOMO, and people found that he had had a conviction chill on this coin the day that it came out. So like, basically it's like if you're interested in gaining cloud, if you're interested in gaining access, making relationships, like doing well on this app is probably the absolute easiest way and the most straightforward way to do that today.
Yeah, I agree with you. Dude's name was Logjam, and
Yes,
he's already gaining motion big time. He'll talk about
absolutely.
something, and the token will just rip.
Yep.
Yeah, it's really crazy. I wanted to ask you about that, but you kind of answered the question, right? Like in the days of friend tech, I kind of played around with friend tech a little bit. I never got too into it because I didn't really have too much money to spend at the time. But those were like the Telegram chat. Before the Telegram chat, you just pay to be in that thing and you're good to
Hmm.
go, right? What would you say is maybe outside of just following somebody on FOMO and maybe tracking them down? How do you go about building up a network of people
Yeah,
today as a new participant? What are like the quickest steps to like the most potentially fruitful relationships, I guess?
totally. Man, I mean, I think it's harder now than I think it was in the past, right? Like, um, when on-chain was kind of like still in its like nascent years, I guess, so to speak, like pre-pump fun when everyone was still trading on ETH. It felt like a small world and kind of like the little like Telegram chat clans had not maybe fully formed, right? And now like a lot of people are very entrenched. It's kind of like group versus group almost, right? And getting people to like break that pattern and to accept somebody new into their circle is not the easiest way, but or is not the easiest thing. But I think the best way, like that I already mentioned, is just do well on FOMO. Do well being early to coins, calling coins. Build your bankroll, show that you have a positive PNL. And then on the back of that, I think you need to be proactive, right? And so like, what does that mean? That means basically just like putting yourself out there and reaching out to people. Like I know so many guys who built their network on the back of cold DMs and shills to, people who have motion or whatever you want to call it, right? So it's like some guy with a couple hundred followers, reaching out to like Uber Mendez over and over and over again with like, hey, this coin's sweet. Here's why I think it's sweet. It's at 100K. And eventually a few of those hit, and then this guy gives you a shout out, or he feels indebted to you and thinks that you're a good scanner. He thinks you're a good trencher. He invites you into whatever his circle is. Who knows how it kind of manifests, but I think it's just it's as simple as like get good or like show good results, and then help other people make money basically, right? Like if you help somebody else hit trades, then that's the easiest way to win their heart. um I think aside from those two, uh I think like being active in like discords like this one for example, or like other more public groups, or like maybe even like some of those like paid chats where it's like $50 a month or something like that to like get into, I don't even know. I don't know any of them off the top of my head, but they're floating around, right? Like you join those, you give good intel, you're active, you show people that you get it, right? And then you make relationships in there, and then who knows, maybe like somebody invites you into an existing chat, maybe you and a few other dudes in that group spin off and make a private chat, whatever it looks like, right? But yeah, I think it's like don't be shy, get your thoughts out, help others be successful, and build your kind of like public reputation, whether that be through the FOMO leaderboard or through like having a strong paper trail in your Telegram channel or on Twitter.
Yeah, the cold DM reach out is supremely underrated and also completely goaded. Like
Yeah,
I
it's probably the best thing you can do.
it's the best thing you can do. I have had so much success being the person that has just been willing to reach out to somebody who has seemed completely unreachable. And
Yeah,
just shoot your shot. I always recommend like shoot your shot. Never hurts to try.
totally
Um,
right. Worst thing they can say is no, right? I mean, I worked in sales for quite some time before coming to crypto, and I think that was like one that background really helped me with that because I've just like heard every version of no basically that exists under the sun over the course of years, and so I was like, all right, well, I'm not afraid to have some guy like ignore me or just tell me that they're not interested, right? So yeah, just bury the fear of rejection and know that the worst thing that can happen is nothing basically.
right. Yeah, totally. So, what would you say is the most counterintuitive signal that you find to be helpful? And what signal are you always going to fade? It could be a person, it could be a narrative, it could be a gut feeling, whatever. What is like
Mm.
something that you do that you find success with that most people would think wouldn't bring success? And what is something that is like stereotypically known as you do this to become successful that you tend to fade?
Sure. Man, that's a tricky one. I don't know if I have a good answer off the top of my head, but I think I'll kind of like steer in a different direction and give you like, an answer that maybe is like still applicable, which is that I really don't think that there's like, you said like, what do you always do? What do you not always do? There, I think that that's like a bad mindset. The flexibility is like the name of the game, and there really isn't like something that you should never do or something you should always do. I mean, like, I guess like apart from like the cardinal sins of like oversizing or just like trading on tilt or like things like that, like obviously don't do those. But like aside from kind of like those few like rude evils or like things that tend to like blow traders up, I think there's always a scenario where something didn't work in the past and it does work for this particular trade and vice versa. So um I think the best thing you can do is kind of like build your intuition, and the way to do that is by just being active and taking trades and learning from them, so that you can do your best job to identify whether is this time different or not, basically, right? Like you hear that all the time, right? This time's different. Usually it's not, but sometimes it is, and when it is, those are when the opportunity is the most asymmetric, because the vast majority of people around you are operating on what like that it's just like something you never do. You never buy the like Ansem shill or something right at the top because he's topped like the last 10 coins. Well, eventually there's going to be one that he doesn't top, and it runs to some crazy number, right? And like don't you're going to be rewarded massively for being the one that kind of takes that risk. So I think every situation is pretty unique, and they're very much like in a constant state of ebb and flow, and it's your job to just like clock in every day and kind of recognize how are things moving this week.
Could what you just said be summarized at least to some degree by just simply saying to fade consensus?
Yeah, I think that fading consensus is something that is like it depends, right? So like I think it's like who's the consensus based on, right? So like if you have early consensus from like amazing traders or people who have like a good hit rate, then you shouldn't fade it, right? Especially if it's like in the early days of the trade. I think you want to fade consensus when it's like, your Uber driver or like the guy who's always late to the trade or like, the guy who you've like identified as a fade. When all those people and like your entire Twitter timeline feels, a certain way about something, that's a good time to steer the other direction.
Yeah. Do you have a particular person or people that you tend to fade? And do you have a
Yeah,
particular
yeah,
person?
absolutely. Yeah. I'm not going to say any names,
Oh
but
man.
yeah, I think, having a list of like counters, so to speak, is probably just as, if not more powerful than having a list of like people whose opinion you really value. The reason being, right, like the vast majority of traders are losers, right? Like it's the top, 10% takes 90% of the money. That's like the adage. And so if you're able to kind of identify who's often on the wrong side, statistically, they're gonna statistically they're wrong more often than they're right. And so like over a long sample size, you should probably be able to be profitable off of that signal. But it's like I think the large sample size really, really matters because there's just variance along the way, right? Like you go on a hot streak, you go on a cold streak, and whether you're good or not is only revealed over the course of months, if not years. And so, if you like identified someone's a counter, then don't start following them just because they hit a couple good ones in a row. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. I want to kind of take a step back and talk about you touched on oversizing. I
Yeah.
speak to so many people in this community, so many newer traders, and one of the most popular things in FOMO is the fumble card. I don't know if you've been paying attention to this, but like
Yes.
I
Those
feel
are
like
very mean of you guys.
I feel like the fumble cards, they're more mimetic. They're more
Yeah.
like everybody has a great fumble card. Not
Oh
everybody
God, yeah.
has a killer P&L card, but everybody has like that token that they bought early, they sold because of whatever reason, and it ripped and they would have made a ton of money, right? Every single
Yep.
person on FOMO basically has one of those. And the common thing that I find when I talk to traders, because I try and like dig in with people about, like why did this happen? Why did you miss out on this? Why did you buy the token in the first place? And what about your idea changed to make you sell it before ultimately the token did well? And the thing that I find when talking to people, most of the time, it's that they had too much money on the line. So, can you kind of
Yeah.
talk me through how you size and
Yeah.
maybe some like general rules that you utilize for sizing? Um, just something that we can maybe give people to maybe try out on their own.
Totally. I think sizing is like the like ultimate kind of, I don't know, like it's like the last demon you have to slay, right? Like it's the final boss fight. And it's frankly the hardest one. Some guys I think see a lot of success, and I think probably the best thing to do early on, and maybe always, frankly, is to have base bet sizes, right? So like if you look at like sports gamblers, for example, they're bet on units, right? So it's like I bet 1 unit here for like that's my baseline, and then I can go up to like 3 units for max conviction. Um, I think most traders like that's how perps guys mostly trade too, or at least the ones that are successful over a long period of time. Replicating that for on chain is probably the best thing you can do to like give yourself the longest runway with like the most amount of kind of like uh room for wiggle room and room for error, right? So if you've got a $10,000 port, maybe your unit is $500 and the maximum that you're willing to put on a line for something is $1,500, right? So you're betting 5 to 15% of your port every single time. Arguably, maybe already too high, but let's just use those numbers. Um, that gives you the ability to be wrong, somewhere between 20 and whatever, like 7 or 8 times in a row. Um, and that's fairly unlikely to happen, right? If you're doing all the other things correctly, and if you're setting yourself up for high RR situations. So that means, you're risking 1 unit, but if it's the right spot, you stand to gain 5, 10, 15, 20. Like those are the trades that you should be looking for on chain. Um, so I think that's like probably the best thing that you can do is just like keep it flat. Like always bet the same amount. With the ability to like add a little bit extra if it's something that you feel really strongly about. Um, and yeah, I mean, just like oversizing is a killer. It's the way that I have given the most of my money back. And something that is really rooted in like in greed at the end of the day, right? Like you want to hit a home run, when in reality you should be trying to hit a single or a double. And so like the longer I've traded, the more I realize that anytime you try to take a shortcut is often when the market kind of slaps you back to reality and reminds you that there are no shortcuts in this. Um, so like don't compare yourself to the guy who hit the lucky trade. I think it's better to compare yourself to the guy who consistently has been on the right side for a long sample, and try to emulate that versus like going for the zero to hero type of plays. And I do think like to kind of it sucks because like everything in trading has a caveat, and there's always a period where you need to do the opposite. Um, really like getting a sense, whether it's through data or through your intuition, of how hot things are, how high the ceilings are, and how does it check all the other boxes we've talked about in terms of like being novel and like having like a wide potential reach, et cetera, et cetera. Like there are these like asymmetric periods and opportunities where you should probably size up and try to capture them. Um, but those windows are really, really short, and I think like 90% of the year, or 90% of a cycle, it's best to just go slow and steady, and to just stack consistent smaller wins, and then slowly increase your size due to the fact that your bankroll is growing.
Yeah, all great advice. How often are you in a trade versus not in a trade? And how do you determine portfolio construction? Like
Yeah.
what is a good amount of positions for you to hold at any given time? How much of your port is cash at any given time? Maybe not
um
any given time, but like specifically in the conditions that we're in right now.
for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think like one of my kind of like Achilles heels as a trader has been the need to always be in a trade. And so it's something that I definitely, am kind of like always subconsciously battling and have slowly gotten better at. Um, one thing that I've kind of noticed over time is that when I'm in a couple of coins, let's call it two, three, four, that's usually when I'm thinking the clearest and trading the best. And when it's probably like not frothy conditions. And when all of a sudden I catch myself in 10 coins or even more, um, it's a signal for me to like take risk off the table, right? So like sometimes you just like get caught in the moment, things are hot, your buddies are scanning things, you see people on FOMO buying all these different coins, they all sound cool, they're all running, and you're like, I need to be in all of these, right? And so you've like spread your bets, you got 9, 10 things that you're all of a sudden in. When I open my wallet and I see that, it's often a signal for me to be like, okay, like people will probably start risking off sooner or later. So it's probably a good time for me to try to beat that and start reducing my own risk. Whether and so that usually looks like cutting the ones that I have the least amount of conviction in, trimming the ones that I have the most conviction in. and trying to kind of like ride the last bit of the wave. So yeah, hopefully that answered the question.
Totally. How do you process going from super convicted to acceptance that your conviction is wrong?
Man, I think usually the market shows you, right? Like it's the price goes against what you thought was correct. And it's often hard to make peace with that. Um, but that's probably the best way, frankly, is just like it's a very black and white type of game that we play. And so the chart's going to tell you whether other people agree with your conviction or not. Um, that being said, there are moments in time where uh, you're just ahead of the curve and the rest of the market hasn't realized what you've realized. So I think it's kind of like that's the important piece to identify. It's like, you do your research, you talk to people, you kind of try to understand, what other people are making the trade based off of. And like in crypto, on chain especially, and especially in this environment, most people are honestly trading on borrowed conviction and just kind of like following the herd. Um, so if you feel like there's something that you're seeing that other people aren't, you got to just trust your gut. And, sometimes you win big off of it and sometimes you lose small. And that's just part of the game.
Do you have any really good examples of when you were ahead of the curve where you're
Yeah,
just like talk us through maybe like how you developed the understanding that like everybody else was wrong?
man. That's a good question. I think Cerebro is a pretty good example of it. That had some of the like worst, choppiest PA for quite some time before it finally kind of like started its parabolic ascent. And to me, it was like, I think certain trades and certain narratives like speak to you as a person, and then other ones don't. So like this one, for example, like I grew up on rap and hip hop music. I thought it was cool. I thought that, the idea of like an AI rapper was cool. I thought that, it had the potential to like go mainstream and to like capture people's attention outside of crypto, which is like usually, um a very huge catalyst, and something that you want to be looking for, right? Like, can this escape our little bubble? And I thought it checked those boxes. So like I DCA'd, the like disgusting price action for a week or two or whatever it was. And I was proven to be right. So like I think not every trade has to be your trade. Like there's always going to be just like certain things that innately speak to us because of who we are as people. What interests us outside of crypto, like what fills your cup basically, right? And so like when you find something like that, that's when you can actually like develop true conviction. Um, and recognizing those opportunities and recognizing when it's just like probably better for you to scalp it or swing it because you don't have that like strong feeling is best, because if you don't feel strongly, like you're just going to get shaken out when price moves against you. So I think, over time I've tried to recognize that more and more, is that like just because someone else is getting rich off of a coin doesn't mean I have to get rich off of this one. Like my moment will eventually come, and it's going to be when like all the stars align, right? And those are rare, but they're the ones that, can buy you a house off of a trade.
If you lost your whole account tomorrow, how would you think about rebuilding it?
Ooh, man, the tough the tough spot to be in. I would really just one like if you don't have cash flow outside of crypto, then like that should be your first thing. So find a job, build something, whatever that looks like for you. Find a way to start making money outside of trading so that you don't have to lean on trading alone, because it's already a game that's like really pressure packed. And so if you add the additional pressure of needing to win to pay your bills and keep food on the table or whatever, it's just setting yourself up to have that much more of a difficult path. And then from there, I mean, I think I would just, you size down and you try to slowly build back up. I don't think that there's like a magic bullet. It's just like avoid, forget that number, wipe it from your head, get back to basics. Trade in a way that's very disciplined, regimented. Stick to your bet sizes. Don't deviate from those. And just like kind of eat the whale one bite at a time, basically.
Got it. Well, Foobs, man, this has been such a
Thank you very
pleasure.
much. Yeah, it was awesome.
I really appreciate your willingness to come in here and chat with us. I would love to have you back sometime later on this year and do it again.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Thank you guys all for listening in. I hope it was helpful, and yeah, thank you for having me.
All right, brother. Well, we'll chat again soon. Take care of yourself, and
All right, take
yeah, we'll
care.
see you. All right, man. Bye.
Cheers.